3 days of freezing rain couldn't kill her, but the man watching from the penthouse window above might just save her life, or destroy what's left of it. A homeless woman with nothing but her dignity catches the eye of Chicago's most dangerous crime boss, and in one impossible moment, he makes a decision that will shatter both their worlds. Will she trust the monster offering her a way out, or will his dark empire pull her under for good? If you want to see how far love can rise from the ashes of survival, stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches. Now let's begin. Nud. The rain had no mercy. For 3 straight days, it hammered the crumbling brick alleys behind Michigan Avenue, turning every forgotten corner of Chicago into a cold, gray hell. Most people didn't even know these alleys existed. They walked past the mouth of them on their way to work, phones glowing in their hands, umbrellas tilted just right, never once glancing toward the shadows where the city hid its unwanted. Vivian Hale knew those shadows well. She crouched beneath a sagging piece of cardboard propped against a dumpster, her knees pulled tight to her chest, her breath coming out in short, visible clouds. The cardboard was useless. It had soaked through hours ago, collapsing in the middle like a broken spine, but she stayed under it anyway because it was all she had. Water dripped steadily onto her shoulder, cold enough to make her skin ache, but she didn't move. Moving took energy. Energy required food. And food was something she hadn't seen in 2 days. Her hair hung around her like a curtain of filth and weight. Once, it had been light brown, soft, something she'd been proud of. Now it was a matted, tangled mass that reached past her waist, so heavy it pulled at her scalp when she tried to lift her head. She'd given up trying to manage it a long time ago. There were no brushes in this life, no mirrors, no reason to care what she looked like when no one looked at her anyway. Vivian closed her eyes and tried to remember warmth. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the way it used to smell like cinnamon and butter on Sunday mornings. She thought about hot showers, thick towels, the feeling of clean sheets against her skin. But the memories didn't help. They only made the cold sharper, the hunger deeper, the weight of everything she'd lost too heavy to carry. A door slammed somewhere down the alley. Vivian's eyes snapped open. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Footsteps echoed off the wet pavement, quick and uneven, like someone in a hurry. She pressed herself further back against the wall, trying to disappear into the bricks. Most people ignored her, but some didn't. Some kicked, some spat, some did worse. The footsteps got closer. A young man appeared around the corner of the dumpster, maybe 22, wearing a grease-stained apron and a baseball cap pulled low. He worked at the Italian restaurant 2 blocks over. Vivian had seen him before, though she doubted he'd ever noticed her. He was carrying a plastic bag, the kind with handles, and he moved like he was doing something he wasn't supposed to. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, his eyes flicking nervously toward the street. "Hey," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "You still here?" Vivian didn't answer. She just stared at him, waiting to see what he wanted, ready to run if she had to. The young man shifted his weight, glanced over his shoulder again, then set the bag down on the ground between them. "There's food in there," he said quickly. "Pasta, bread. It's still warm. We were going to throw it out anyway, so—" He stopped, shook his head, looked embarrassed. "Just take it, okay?" He turned and walked away before she could say a word. Vivian watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest. When he disappeared around the corner, she reached out slowly and pulled the bag toward her. The plastic was dry. The warmth coming off the food inside made her hand shake. She opened it carefully, like it might vanish if she moved too fast. Inside was a container of spaghetti with marinara sauce, a thick slice of garlic bread wrapped in foil, and a bottle of water. The smell hit her all at once: tomatoes, basil, butter, garlic, and her stomach twisted so violently she almost cried. Vivian didn't pray anymore. She'd stopped years ago, right around the time she realized no one was listening. But sitting there in the rain with warm food in her lap, she came close. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to rush, not to make herself sick. Every bite tasted like a memory she couldn't quite hold on to. Every swallow felt like a small miracle she didn't deserve. She was halfway through the container when she felt it, the weight of someone's eyes. Vivian froze, her hand hovering over the pasta, every muscle in her body going tight. She looked up slowly, scanning the alley, the fire escapes, the broken windows above her. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. Someone was watching her. She was sure of it. 15 stories above the alley, Roman DeLuca stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his phone dark and forgotten on the desk behind him. He wasn't supposed to be looking down there. He had a meeting in 20 minutes with his accountant, another one after that with his lawyer, and a sit-down at midnight with a supplier who'd been skimming product for the last 3 months. Roman's life was structured, efficient, brutal when it needed to be. He didn't waste time staring out windows like some bored tourist. But tonight, something had pulled his attention to the alley below. At first, he'd thought it was the kid from the restaurant, Marco, one of his cousin's nephew's friends, some college dropout working the line to pay off student loans. Roman had seen him sneak out the back door with the bag of food, watched him leave it for the woman huddled against the wall like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. Roman had almost looked away. But then the woman moved. She pulled the bag toward her with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold it, and when she opened the container, the look on her face stopped him cold. Not relief, not gratitude, disbelief. Like she couldn't believe the food was real. Like she couldn't believe someone had left it for her. Roman set his glass down on the windowsill and leaned closer. The woman was filthy, soaked through, her hair a tangled disaster that looked like it weighed more than she did. She couldn't have been more than 30, but it was hard to tell under all the dirt and exhaustion. She ate like someone who'd forgotten how, slow and careful, her eyes darting around the alley, like she expected someone to take it away from her. And then she looked up, straight at him. Roman didn't move. He knew she couldn't see him, not from that distance, not through tinted glass. But for a second, it felt like she could. Like she was looking right through the steel and money and power that separated them, straight into something he'd buried a long time ago. He turned away from the window and picked up his phone. "Luca," he said when his second-in-command answered. "You see the alley behind the restaurant?" There was a pause. "Yeah, boss, what about it?" "There's a woman down there, homeless. I want you to bring her inside." Another pause, longer this time. "Inside where?" "Here, the building. Bring her up the service entrance. Be gentle about it. Don't scare her." "Boss, I didn't ask what you think," Roman said quietly. "Just do it." He hung up before Luca could argue. Roman didn't know why he'd made the call. He didn't have a reason that made sense, not one he could explain to Luca or to himself. All he knew was that the woman in the alley had looked up at him with eyes that were still alive, still fighting, still holding on to something that should have died a long time ago. And something about that wouldn't let him look away. Oh, Vivian was finishing the last of the bread when she heard the footsteps again. This time, there were 2 sets. She shoved the empty container back into the bag and scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her, her heart slamming against her ribs. She didn't know where to run. The alley was a dead end. The only way out was past whoever was coming. 2 men appeared around the corner, both wearing dark coats, both moving slow and deliberate. The one in front was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek. The one behind him was younger, leaner, with sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. Vivian backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. "It's okay," the tall one said, holding up both hands like he was approaching a spooked animal. "We're not here to hurt you." "Then what do you want?" Vivian's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Our boss wants to talk to you." "I don't know your boss." "You don't have to. He just wants to help." Vivian laughed, a bitter, broken sound that hurt her throat. "Nobody helps people like me." The tall one, Luca, she'd hear him called later, tilted his head slightly, his expression softening in a way she didn't expect. "Look," he said, "I get it. You don't know us, you don't trust us, but it's cold, you're soaked, and you've got nowhere to go tonight. All we're asking is that you come inside, get warm, maybe eat something that didn't come out of a dumpster. If you want to leave after that, you leave. No one's going to stop you." Vivian stared at him, her mind racing, her body so tired it could barely hold itself upright. She knew this was a bad idea. She knew better than to trust strange men offering things that sounded too good to be true. She'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. But the rain was coming down harder now, and the cold was seeping into her bones, and the part of her that still wanted to survive, however small and stubborn and stupid, whispered that maybe, just this once, she could take the risk. "One night," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Just one." Luca nodded. "One night." What? They led her through a service entrance at the back of a sleek modern building she'd walked past 100 times without ever really seeing. Inside, the floors were polished marble, the walls lined with dark wood and soft lighting that made everything look expensive and untouchable. Vivian felt like a stain on the floor. She kept her head down, her arms wrapped around herself, trying not to drip too much on the pristine surfaces. The two men didn't say anything as they walked her to an elevator, then rode it up in silence. When the doors opened, they stepped into a hallway that looked more like a hotel than an apartment building. Luca stopped in front of a door near the end and pulled out a key card. "This is you," he said, pushing the door open. "Bathroom's through there. There's clothes in the closet. Might not fit perfect, but they're clean. Food's in the kitchen. You need anything? There's a phone on the table. Just pick it up." Vivian stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving over the space like she was seeing it through glass. It was an apartment. A real apartment. Clean walls, soft lighting, a couch that looked like it had never been sat on. A kitchen with a stove, a fridge, cabinets full of things she couldn't even imagine anymore. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Luca hesitated, glanced at the younger man beside him, then looked back at her. "Because someone told us to," he said simply, "and because maybe you deserve a break." He handed her the key card and stepped back into the hallway. "Get some rest," he said. "You're safe here." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Vivian stood in the middle of the apartment, trembling, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. She didn't move for a long time. She just stood there, waiting for someone to come back and tell her it was all a mistake, that she didn't belong here, that she needed to leave. But no one came. Slowly, carefully, she walked to the bathroom. The light came on automatically when she stepped inside, bright and clean, and almost painful after so many nights in the dark. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and stopped. She didn't recognize the face staring back at her. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, skin pale and stretched too tight over bone, hair that looked like it belonged to someone who'd given up on being human. Vivian turned away before the tears could start. She turned on the shower, peeled off her wet, filthy clothes, and stepped under the water. It was hot, clean, endless. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Hale let herself cry. Roman didn't go to the apartment that night. He told himself it was because he had work to do, meetings to finish, problems to solve. But the truth was simpler than that. He didn't know what to say to her. He sat at his desk long after midnight, staring at the security feed from the hallway outside her door, watching the light inside flicker on and off as she moved through the space. He saw her shadow pass in front of the window, saw her stand in the bathroom doorway for what felt like an hour, saw her finally sink onto the couch and pull her knees to her chest, still dripping wet, still shaking. She didn't look like someone who'd been saved. She looked like someone who didn't know what to do with safety anymore. Roman turned off the monitor and poured himself another drink. He'd made a lot of bad decisions in his life. Dangerous ones, violent ones. Decisions that had cost people everything. But as he sat there in the dark, watching the rain streak down the windows, he couldn't shake the feeling that bringing that woman inside might be the most reckless thing he'd ever done. Not because it put him at risk, but because it put her at risk of hoping again. Vivian woke up on the couch with sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The light was wrong. The air was wrong. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too soft. Then she remembered. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she'd forgotten could hurt. The apartment was still there. The couch was still real. The kitchen, the bathroom, the closet full of clothes, all of it was still real. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city stretched out in every direction, bright and busy and alive. People moved along the sidewalks below. Cars honked and swerved. The world kept turning like it always did. Vivian pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the coolness of it against her palm. She'd spent so long invisible that being seen, really seen, felt dangerous. But she was still here, still breathing, still alive. And for the first time in years, she let herself wonder if maybe that was enough to start with. The knock came just after 10 in the morning. Vivian had been awake for hours, sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the door like it might bite her. She'd showered again, twice actually, scrubbing her skin until it hurt, trying to wash away years of filth that wouldn't come off no matter how hard she tried. She'd found clothes in the closet like the man had said, jeans that were too big, a soft gray sweater that hung off her shoulders, socks that were clean and warm. Everything smelled like laundry detergent, that sharp, chemical flower smell that used to be normal and now felt like luxury. But her hair was still a disaster. She tried to comb through it with her fingers in the shower, but it was hopeless. The knots were too tight, too deep, woven together by months of neglect and rain and sleeping on concrete. She'd given up after 10 minutes, her scalp bleeding in places where she'd pulled too hard, and now it hung around her in damp, matted ropes that made her look like something dragged out of a lake. The knock came again, firmer this time. Vivian stood slowly and crossed the room, her heart hammering. She put her hand on the doorknob but didn't turn it. "Who is it?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to talk to people. "It's Luca," came the reply from the other side. "I've got breakfast." She opened the door a crack. Luca stood in the hallway holding a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard carrier. He looked less intimidating in daylight, still big, still scarred, but there was something almost gentle in the way he held himself, like he was trying not to take up too much space. "Morning," he said. "You sleep okay?" Vivian didn't answer. She just stared at him, waiting for the catch, the demand, the price she'd have to pay for the night she'd spent in safety. Luca seemed to understand. He set the bag and the coffee down on the floor just outside the door, then took a step back. "Bagels," he said, "and coffee. Cream and sugar's in the bag if you want it. No one's coming in unless you say so. You've got the key card. This is your space." He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her. "Boss wants to meet you later, if you're up for it. No pressure, just a conversation." "Who is he?" Vivian asked. Luca hesitated like he was choosing his words carefully. "Someone who doesn't usually do things like this," he said finally, "but when he does, he means it." He walked away before she could ask anything else. Vivian waited until he disappeared around the corner, then grabbed the bag and the coffee and shut the door quickly, locking it behind her. She carried everything to the kitchen table and sat down, her hands shaking as she opened the bag. 2 bagels, cream cheese, a small container of fruit, a napkin with a plastic knife. She ate slowly, mechanically, barely tasting anything. Her mind was somewhere else, running through every possible reason why a stranger would bring her inside, give her food and shelter, and ask for nothing in return. People didn't do that. Not in her experience. Not without wanting something. Roman watched the security feed from his office, his fingers drumming against the edge of his desk. She'd taken the food. That was something. She'd also locked the door the second Luca left, which told him everything he needed to know about how much she trusted the situation. Smart. He didn't blame her. "You gonna tell me what this is about?" Luca asked from the doorway. Roman glanced up. His second-in-command stood with his arms crossed, his expression somewhere between confused and concerned. "No," Roman said simply. "Boss, I've worked for you for 8 years. I've seen you do a lot of things. But bringing a homeless woman into one of our properties and setting her up like she's a long-lost relative? That's new." "Your point?" "My point is, people are going to ask questions. Tony already asked me why we're wasting an apartment on some random woman when we've got business associates who could use the space. And I didn't have an answer." Roman leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the monitor. "Tell Tony to mind his own business," he said quietly, "and tell anyone else who asks the same thing." Luca sighed. "You're the boss." "That's right." Luca didn't move. He just stood there, waiting, like he knew Roman wasn't finished. "She looked at me," Roman said after a long silence. "What?" "Last night, in the alley. She looked up and for a second I thought she could see me, like she knew I was watching." He paused, his jaw tightening, and she didn't look away. Luca frowned. "I don't follow." "Most people look away when they see me," Roman said. "They look down, they look past me. They pretend I'm not there because it's easier than acknowledging what I am. But she looked right at me. Even when she had nothing, even when she was dying in the rain, she still looked. He turned away from the monitor and met Luca's eyes. I don't know what that means yet, he admitted, but I'm gonna find out. Vivian spent the rest of the morning pacing the apartment like a caged animal. She couldn't sit still, couldn't relax. Every time she tried to let her guard down, her mind flooded with questions she couldn't answer. Who was this man? What did he want? How long before the kindness turned into something else? She'd been through this before. Different city, different man, same trap. Her husband, ex-husband, she had to keep reminding herself, had started the same way, gentle, patient, offering her things she needed when she was vulnerable. And by the time she realized what he really was, it was too late. She was already his, already trapped, already broken down into something she didn't recognize. Vivian stopped pacing and pressed her hands against the kitchen counter, her breath coming too fast. She couldn't do this again. She wouldn't survive it. The phone on the table rang, sharp and sudden, and she jumped so hard she knocked over the empty coffee cup. It clattered across the counter and fell to the floor, rolling under the table. The phone kept ringing. Vivian stared at it like it was a snake. On the fifth ring, she picked it up. Hello? It's Luca. Just checking in. You doing okay? She didn't know how to answer that, so she said nothing. Listen, Luca continued, his voice careful. The boss is asking if you'd be willing to meet him this afternoon. Just a conversation. You can do it here in the building, somewhere public if that makes you feel better. Lobby, maybe. Or the cafe downstairs. What does he want to talk about? I don't know, he didn't say. But I can tell you he's not going to hurt you. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Luca was quiet for a moment. I think he wants to help, he said finally, and I think he's trying to figure out how. Vivian closed her eyes, her hand gripping the phone so hard her knuckles went white. Okay, she whispered. The cafe. 2:00. I'll let him know. The line went dead. Vivian set the phone down and sank into the nearest chair, her whole body trembling. She didn't know if she'd just made the right choice or the worst mistake of her life. She guessed she'd find out soon enough. The cafe was small, tucked into the corner of the building's lobby, all dark wood and soft jazz and the smell of expensive coffee. Vivian sat at a table near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched, watching every person who walked through the door. She'd almost turned around 3 times on the way down, but something kept her moving forward. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was desperation, maybe it was just the stubborn part of her that refused to keep running forever. At exactly 2:00, a man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked like it cost more than she used to make in 6 months. His hair was black, streaked with gray at the temples, and his face was hard in the way that came from years of making decisions other people couldn't live with. But his eyes were softer than she expected, dark brown, steady, watching her the way you'd watch something fragile that might break if you moved too fast. He walked over to her table and stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. Vivian? He asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm Roman, he said. Mind if I sit? She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down slowly, like he was giving her time to change her mind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe hummed quietly around them, espresso machines hissing, quiet conversation, the clink of silverware against ceramic. Thank you for meeting me, Roman said finally. I didn't have much choice. You did. You could have left. No one would have stopped you. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for the lie. But she didn't see one. She saw something else instead. Something she couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe. Or recognition. Why did you bring me inside? She asked. Roman leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Honestly? He said. I'm not sure. I saw you in the alley, and something about the way you looked. He stopped, shook his head. You didn't look defeated. You looked like you were still fighting, and I don't see that very often. I wasn't fighting. I was starving. Same thing, sometimes. Vivian's jaw tightened. What do you want from me? Nothing, Roman said, and the word landed between them like something heavy. I don't want anything from you. I want to help you, if you'll let me. People don't help for free. Most people don't, he agreed, but I'm not most people. Then what are you? Roman smiled, but there was no humor in it. Complicated, he said. Teat. They talked for over an hour. At first, Vivian kept her answers short, guarded, waiting for him to push too hard or ask the wrong question. But Roman didn't push. He asked simple things. How long she'd been on the streets, whether she'd eaten that morning, if the apartment was comfortable enough. He didn't ask about her past, didn't pry into the things she wasn't ready to say out loud. And slowly, carefully, she started to relax. I used to be a nurse, she said at one point, surprising herself. Roman looked up from his coffee. Yeah? Long time ago, before everything fell apart. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. I was good at it. I liked helping people. Made me feel like I mattered. You still matter. Vivian laughed bitterly. You don't know me. I know you survived, Roman said quietly. That counts for something. She didn't know what to say to that, so she looked out the window instead, watching people walk past on the street outside. Normal people. People with jobs and homes and lives that made sense. I can get you back on your feet, Roman said. If you want. Clean clothes, a safe place to stay, help with whatever you need, no strings, no expectations. Why? Because I can, and because you deserve it. Vivian turned back to him, her eyes hard. You don't know what I deserve. Maybe not, Roman admitted, but I know what you don't deserve, and dying in an alley isn't it. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the trap, the angle, the thing he wasn't saying. But all she saw was a man who looked like he understood what it felt like to carry weight no one else could see. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But if this goes sideways, I'm gone. You understand? I understand. Roman stood and pulled a business card from his pocket, setting it on the table between them. There's a salon 2 blocks from here, yeah? He said. Best in the city. I called ahead. They're expecting you tomorrow at 10. They'll take care of your hair, whatever else you need. It's already paid for. Vivian stared at the card like it might burn her. I can't afford... You're not paying, Roman interrupted gently. I am. Consider it part of the deal. What deal? The one where you stop fighting alone. He walked out before she could argue, leaving her sitting there with the business card in her hand and a feeling in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, terrifying hope. The salon was nothing like Vivian expected. She'd imagined something cold and sterile, full of mirrors and judgment, and people who'd take one look at her and decide she didn't belong. But when she walked through the door the next morning, clutching the business card like a lifeline, she was met with warmth instead. The receptionist smiled at her. Actually smiled, like she was happy to see her, and led her to a private room in the back where a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands was waiting. You must be Vivian, the woman said. I'm Angela. Come on, sit down. Let's see what we're working with. Vivian sat in the chair, her hands gripping the armrests, her whole body tense. Angela moved around her slowly, lifting sections of Vivian's hair with careful fingers, assessing the damage without comment. After a moment, she set down her scissors and met Vivian's eyes in the mirror. This is going to take some time, she said honestly, but we'll get through it, I promise. You don't have to promise me anything. I know, but I'm going to anyway. For the next 6 hours, Angela worked. She didn't rush, didn't complain, didn't make Vivian feel like a burden or a charity case. She just worked, her hands gentle and precise, cutting away the worst of the tangles, treating the sections that could be saved, talking quietly about nothing important while Vivian sat frozen in the chair, too afraid to believe this was real. At one point, Angela paused and set down her comb. You doing okay? She asked. Need a break? Vivian shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. Angela squeezed her shoulder once, then went back to work. By the time she finished, the sun was setting outside, painting the salon in shades of gold and amber. Angela stepped back and turned the chair around so Vivian could see herself in the mirror. Vivian's breath caught. Her hair was short now, just past her shoulders, layered and soft and clean. It looked like hair again, like something that belonged to a person, not a ghost. She lifted a hand slowly, touching the ends, half expecting them to crumble under her fingers. "It's not perfect," Angela said quietly, "but it's yours, and it's beautiful." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, and this time, she didn't try to stop them. Roman was waiting for her when she got back to the building. He was standing in the lobby, hands in his pockets, looking out at the street through the glass doors. When Vivian walked in, he turned, and for a second something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. "You look—" He stopped, searching for the right word. "You look like yourself." Vivian touched her hair self-consciously. "I don't know who that is anymore." "Then maybe it's time to find out." They stood there in silence for a moment, the space between them heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "Thank you," Vivian said finally, her voice rough. "For the salon. For everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do." Roman nodded slowly, then gestured toward the elevator. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you something." He took her to the roof. It was a private space, locked to everyone except Roman and a handful of people he trusted. The city stretched out around them in every direction, lights flickering on as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky purple and gold. Vivian walked to the edge and looked down at the streets below, the same streets she'd been sleeping on a week ago, the same alleys she'd hidden in, the same corners where she'd thought she might die. "I used to come up here when I needed to think," Roman said, standing beside her. "When everything got too loud and I needed to remember why I was doing any of it." "And why were you?" Roman was quiet for a long time. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I used to think I had a good reason. Power, control, protection. But somewhere along the way it stopped making sense, and I couldn't figure out how to walk away." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same exhaustion she carried, just hidden under expensive suits and dangerous choices. "You saved me," she said quietly. "Why can't you save yourself?" Roman laughed, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Because I don't know if I deserve it." "Neither do I," Vivian said, "but here we are." They stood there together as the city glowed beneath them. Two people who'd survived things they shouldn't have, trying to figure out if survival was enough to build something new on. And for the first time in years, Vivian thought maybe it was. 2 weeks later, Vivian stood in front of a brick building on the south side of Chicago, staring at the faded sign above the door that read Mercy Street Clinic in letters that had seen better days. Roman stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, waiting. "This is it?" she asked. "This is it." The building looked like it had been forgotten by the city, cracked windows, peeling paint, weeds growing through the cracks in the sidewalk. But there were people inside. Vivian could see them through the glass, sitting in plastic chairs, waiting for something she couldn't name from where she stood. "I don't understand," she said. "What is this place?" "A clinic," Roman said. "Free medical care for people who can't afford it. No questions asked. No insurance required. We treat whoever walks through the door." Vivian turned to look at him. "We? I fund it," Roman said quietly. "Have for the last 5 years. Most people don't know. The ones who do think it's a front for something else. But it's not. It's just a clinic." "Why?" Roman was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the building. "Because I've done a lot of things I can't take back," he said finally. "And this is the only thing I've ever done that felt like it might balance the scales. Even just a little." Vivian looked back at the clinic, her mind racing. She'd been living in Roman's apartment for 2 weeks now, eating his food, wearing the clothes he'd bought her, trying to figure out what he wanted from her. And every time she thought she had him figured out, he showed her something that didn't fit. "You brought me here for a reason," she said. "I did." "What is it?" Roman turned to face her, his expression serious. "They need a nurse," he said. "Someone with real training, someone who knows what they're doing. The guy we have now is good, but he's overwhelmed. Too many patients, not enough hands. He paused. I thought maybe you'd want to help. Vivian stared at him, her heart pounding. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance, Roman corrected, to do something that matters, to be who you used to be before everything went wrong, if you want it. She didn't know what to say. The idea of stepping back into a medical setting after everything she'd lost felt impossible, like trying to put on a skin that didn't fit anymore. I don't have a license, she said. I let it lapse years ago. I can't legally— We'll get it reinstated, Roman interrupted. I've got people who can handle the paperwork. It'll take some time, but it's doable. In the meantime, you can assist, learn the flow, see if it's something you actually want. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon sun. What if I can't do it, she asked quietly. What if I've been gone too long and I don't remember how? Roman stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Then you figure it out, he said. Same way you've been figuring everything else out, one step at a time. She looked up at him, searching his face for doubt, for pity, for any sign that he didn't actually believe she could do this. But all she saw was certainty. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. The inside of the clinic was worse than the outside. The waiting room was packed. Men, women, children, all of them wearing the same exhausted expression Vivian recognized from her own reflection. The chairs were mismatched, the floor was cracked linoleum, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like dying insects. A man in his early 40s came out from the back, wearing scrubs that had seen too many washes and a stethoscope around his neck. He had dark circles under his eyes, and the kind of weariness that came from caring too much for too long. You must be Vivian, he said, extending a hand. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb. Roman told me you were coming. Vivian shook his hand, her palms sweaty. I'm not sure what I can do here. It's been a long time since I worked in medicine. Marcus smiled, and it was genuine, if tired. You breathe, you help. That's the bar right now. He led her through the clinic, talking fast, pointing out exam rooms that were barely bigger than closets, a supply closet that was half empty, a break room that consisted of a card table and a coffee maker that looked like it had survived a war. We see about 60 patients a day, Marcus said. Everything from colds to gunshot wounds. We do what we can with what we have. Sometimes it's enough. Sometimes it's not. How do you keep going? Vivian asked. Marcus stopped and looked at her, his expression softening. Because if we don't, no one else will, he said simply. These people don't have anywhere else to go, so we show up every day, and we do the best we can. Vivian nodded slowly, something tightening in her chest. She knew these people. She'd been these people. When do I start? She asked. Right now, if you're ready. Masad. The first patient was a woman in her 60s with a cough that sounded like it was tearing her lungs apart. Vivian stood beside Marcus as he listened to her chest, asked questions, wrote notes on a clipboard that was held together with duct tape. Bronchitis, Marcus said quietly to Vivian. Probably from sleeping outside in the cold. We'll give her antibiotics, tell her to rest, and hope she actually does it. Will she? Vivian asked. Probably not, but we try anyway. Vivian watched as Marcus handed the woman a prescription, explained how to take the medication, and sent her on her way with a kindness that felt rare and necessary. The next patient was a teenage boy with a knife wound in his shoulder. The one after that was a pregnant woman who hadn't seen a doctor in 6 months. Then a man with diabetes who'd been rationing his insulin. Then a child with an ear infection her mother couldn't afford to treat anywhere else. They kept coming, one after another, an endless stream of pain and need and quiet desperation. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Vivian stopped thinking. She just moved. She handed Marcus instruments before he asked for them. She cleaned wounds, took vital signs, reassured frightened children in a voice she didn't know she still had. Her hands remembered things her mind had forgotten. How to wrap a bandage, how to find a vein, how to touch someone gently when they were already in pain. By the time the last patient left, it was past 9 at night. Vivian sat in the break room with a cup of terrible coffee, her hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Marcus dropped into the chair across from her, looking like he might fall asleep where he sat. You did good today, he said. I barely did anything. You showed up, That's more than most people do. Vivian stared into her coffee, her throat tight. I forgot what this felt like, she admitted. Helping people, mattering. You always mattered, Marcus said quietly. You just forgot for a while. Roman picked her up outside the clinic just after 10. Vivian climbed into the passenger seat of his car, a black SUV that smelled like leather and expensive cologne, and leaned her head back against the seat, her whole body aching. How was it? Roman asked. Exhausting, Vivian said. And the best thing I've done in years. Roman smiled, a real smile this time, and pulled out into traffic. They drove in silence for a while, the city passing by outside the windows in streaks of light and shadow. Vivian watched the streets, the people, the buildings she'd once called home before everything fell apart. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. Anything. Why do you do it? The clinic, I mean. You said it's to balance the scales, but that doesn't feel like the whole truth. Roman was quiet for a long time, his hands tight on the steering wheel. My sister died when I was 17, he said finally, his voice flat and careful. She got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad infection. But we didn't have money for a doctor, and by the time we scraped together enough to get her to a hospital, it was too late. He paused. She was 9 years old. Vivian's chest tightened. I'm sorry. I told myself if I ever had enough money, I'd make sure no one else had to watch someone they loved die because they couldn't afford help. He glanced at her. So that's what I do. It doesn't bring her back, but it's something. Vivian didn't know what to say, so she reached over and put her hand on his arm. Roman didn't pull away. Over the next month, Vivian fell into a rhythm she hadn't known in years. She woke up early, ate breakfast in the apartment Roman still insisted she keep, and walked the 15 blocks to the clinic. She worked until her feet hurt and her back ached, then walked home in the dark, too tired to think about anything except sleep. But it was good tired, the kind that came from doing something real. Her nursing license was reinstated 3 weeks after she started. Roman's people worked fast, and Marcus officially brought her on as a full-time nurse. The pay wasn't much, but it was hers, earned, not given out of pity or charity. She started recognizing patients, learning their names, hearing their stories. There was Maria, the woman with bronchitis, who came back every week with a different ailment, but really just wanted someone to talk to. There was Tommy, the teenage boy with the knife wound who started volunteering at the clinic after his shoulder healed because he didn't have anywhere else to go. There was Sarah, the pregnant woman, who delivered a healthy baby girl with Vivian's help and named her Grace. Vivian hadn't cried in years, but she cried the day Sarah let her hold Grace for the first time. Roman came by the clinic sometimes, usually late at night when the patients were gone and the doors were locked. He'd sit in the break room with Vivian and Marcus, drinking bad coffee and listening to stories about the day. He never said much, but Vivian could see the way he looked at the clinic, like it was the only clean thing in a life full of dirt. One night, after Marcus had gone home, Vivian and Roman sat alone in the empty waiting room, the overhead lights buzzing softly. You're different than I thought you'd be, Vivian said. Roman raised an eyebrow. How so? I thought you'd be colder, meaner, more like the stories people tell about men like you. Men like me? Vivian met his eyes. You know what you are, Roman. Don't pretend you don't. Roman leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I've done terrible things, he said quietly. Things I can't undo. People have died because of decisions I made, money I took, power I wanted. He paused. But I'm trying to be better. I don't know if it's enough, but I'm trying. That's more than most people do, Vivian said, echoing Marcus's words from weeks ago. Roman looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You make me want to try harder, he admitted. The air between them changed, thickening with something neither of them had named yet. Vivian stood quickly, suddenly afraid of where this was going. I should get home, she said. Early shift tomorrow. Roman stood too, nodding slowly. I'll drive you. But the fragile peace Vivian had been building shattered 2 weeks later. She was restocking supplies in the exam room when Marcus poked his head in, his face pale. "Vivian, there's someone here to see you." "A patient?" "No, he said he's your husband." The blood drained from Vivian's face. "That's not possible," she whispered. But it was. Grant Holloway stood in the waiting room like a ghost she'd thought she'd escaped, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was older now, grayer at the temples, but he still carried himself like a man who owned every room he walked into. Vivian froze in the doorway, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Hello, Vivian," Grant said, his voice smooth and familiar and full of poison. "It's been a long time." "Get out," Vivian said, her voice shaking. "Now, is that any way to greet your husband?" "You're not my husband anymore." Grant's smile widened. "Actually, I am. You never filed for divorce, remember? We're still legally married, which means you're still mine." Vivian's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I was never yours." "That's not how I remember it." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between Vivian and Grant. "I think you should leave." Grant ignored him, his eyes locked on Vivian. "I've been looking for you for a long time. You're good at hiding, I'll give you that. But you can't hide forever. What do you want?" Vivian forced the words out. "I want you to come home," Grant said simply. "We can put all this behind us. Start over. Be a family again." "I'd rather die." Grant's expression hardened, the mask slipping just enough to show the ugliness underneath. "You think you're safe here?" he asked quietly. "You think these people can protect you? I know who's been helping you, Vivian. Roman DeLuca, a criminal, a thug. You think he cares about you? You think he's doing this out of the goodness of his heart? He's a better man than you'll ever be." Grant laughed, a cruel sound that made Vivian's skin crawl. "We'll see about that," he said. "I'll be back, Vivian, and when I come back, you're coming with me, whether you want to or not." He turned and walked out, leaving Vivian standing in the middle of the waiting room, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Marcus caught her before she fell. "It's okay," he said, his voice steady. "You're okay. He's gone." But Vivian knew better. Grant was never gone. He was just getting started. Roman's office was on the 40th floor of a building downtown, all glass and steel and money. Vivian had never been there before, but Luca had picked her up from the clinic and brought her straight here, his face grim and silent the entire drive. Roman was standing at the window when she walked in, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. "He came to the clinic," Vivian said without preamble. Roman turned slowly. "I know." "How?" "I have people watching the clinic. Always. They called me the second he walked in." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry I didn't get there in time to stop him." Vivian crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. "He said he's coming back, that he's going to take me with him." "He's not. You don't know that." Roman walked toward her, his expression hard and dangerous in a way she'd never seen before. "I know exactly who Grant Holloway is," he said quietly. "I know he's got a record of fraud, embezzlement, and domestic violence that goes back 15 years. I know he's been hiding in Boston, running a real estate scam that's about to collapse. And I know he tracked you down because he needs someone to blame when everything falls apart." Vivian stared at him. "How do you know all that?" "Because I've been watching him since the day you told me your story," Roman said. "I don't leave loose ends, Vivian, especially not ones that might hurt people I care about." The words landed between them like stones. "You care about me," Vivian whispered. Roman's expression softened, just a fraction. "More than I should," he admitted. Vivian's breath caught. She didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to hold something so fragile and dangerous at the same time. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Roman's eyes went cold again, the dangerous edge returning. "We're going to end this," he said, "once and for all." Roman's plan was simple, brutal, and designed to leave no room for Grant to maneuver. "We're going to give him exactly what he wants," Roman said, leaning against his desk, arms crossed. "A meeting with you, public, controlled. Somewhere he thinks he has the upper hand." Vivian shook her head, her whole body tense. Are you insane? I'm not going anywhere near him. You won't be alone, I'll be there, Luca will be there. And so will some people who are very interested in what Grant's been doing in Boston for the last 3 years. What people? Journalists, federal investigators, people who've been building a case against him but couldn't find enough evidence to make it stick. Roman's expression was cold, calculated. Until now. Vivian's stomach twisted. You want to use me as bait? I want to use you as the witness who puts him away for good, Roman corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Roman pushed off the desk and walked toward her, his voice dropping to something gentler. I know you're scared, he said, and you have every right to be. But running didn't work. Hiding didn't work. The only way out of this is through him, and I'm not going to let him hurt you again. Vivian looked up at him, her eyes burning. You can't promise that. Watch me. 3 days later, Vivian sat in a booth at a downtown diner, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't drink, waiting for the door to open. Roman sat across from her, calm and still, his eyes never leaving the entrance. Luca was at the counter pretending to read a newspaper. 2 other men Vivian didn't recognize sat near the back, one of them holding a camera with a lens that looked like it could see through walls. He's late, Vivian said, her voice barely audible. He'll come, a Roman said. Men like him can't resist an audience. 5 minutes later, Grant walked in. He looked exactly the same as he had at the clinic, polished, confident, wearing entitlement like a second skin. He scanned the diner, spotted Vivian, and smiled that terrible smile that used to make her stomach drop. He slid into the booth beside her before she could move, trapping her against the wall. There's my girl, he said, his voice low and possessive. I knew you'd come around. Get away from her, Roman said quietly. Grant glanced at Roman like he was noticing him for the first time, then laughed. The boyfriend? Right. I've heard about you, DeLuca. Big man in Chicago, runs half the city from the shadows. He leaned closer to Vivian, his breath hot against her ear. You really think he's better than me? He's a criminal, Vivian. He's worse than I ever was. At least he doesn't hit me, Vivian said, her voice shaking but steady. Grant's smile faltered. I never hit you. You broke my ribs, twice. You dislocated my shoulder. You locked me in a room for 3 days without food. Because I talked to a neighbor. Vivian's hands were trembling now, but she didn't look away. Don't you dare sit there and lie to my face. You're being dramatic. She's being honest, Roman said, which is more than you've ever been in your life. Grant's jaw tightened, his mask slipping. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you, Roman said, his voice flat and dangerous. I know about the real estate fraud in Boston, the fake investors, the shell companies, the $15 million you stole from people who trusted you. I know about the warrants that are about to be issued, the federal investigation that's been building for 2 years. And I know you came here because you thought dragging Vivian back with you would give you leverage. A sympathetic story, the devoted husband trying to save his troubled wife. Grant's face went pale. That's a lie. It's not, Roman said. And here's the problem. You walked into my city thinking you could take something that doesn't belong to you anymore. And I don't let that slide. Grant stood abruptly, his hand shooting out to grab Vivian's wrist. You're coming with me, he hissed. Right now. Vivian tried to pull away, but his grip was iron, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. Let her go, Roman said, his voice dropping to something deadly. Or what? You'll shoot me in a public diner? Grant sneered. You're not that stupid. No, Roman said, but I am that connected. The door to the diner opened. 2 men in suits walked in, federal agents, Vivian realized, from the badges clipped to their belts. Behind them came a woman with a camera and a press credential hanging around her neck. Grant's hand went slack on Vivian's wrist. Grant Holloway? One of the agents said. We have some questions for you regarding financial fraud and embezzlement charges filed in Massachusetts. Grant's face went from pale to gray. I don't know what you're talking about. We have documents, testimony, bank records, and now we have witnesses who can corroborate a pattern of abuse and coercion. The agent glanced at Vivian. Are you Vivian Hale? Vivian nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Would you be willing to give a statement regarding your marriage to Mr. Holloway?
Yes, Vivian whispered, then louder, stronger. Yes. Grant turned on her, his face twisting into something ugly and desperate. You can't do this, he snarled. You're my wife. You can't testify against me. She can if she files for divorce first, Roman said calmly. Which she's doing, today. The papers are already drawn up. You bitch, Grant spat, lunging toward Vivian. Luca was on him in a second, slamming him back against the booth with a hand around his throat. You don't talk to her, Luca said quietly. You don't look at her. You don't breathe in her direction. Understood? Grant struggled, gasping, his face turning red. The federal agent stepped forward. Sir, you need to come with us. Luca released him, and the agents took over, pulling Grant's arms behind his back, cuffing him with efficient, practiced movements. Grant twisted back toward Vivian one last time, his eyes wild and hateful. This isn't over, he said. You think you're free? You'll never be free. I'll make sure of it. Actually, Roman said, standing and buttoning his jacket, it is over. Because in about an hour, every major news outlet in the Northeast is going to run a story about Grant Holloway, the con man who stole millions and abused his wife for years. Your face will be everywhere. Your name will be garbage. And by the time the courts are done with you, you'll be lucky if you see daylight before you're 70. Grant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The agents led him toward the door. The journalist followed, her camera clicking, capturing every moment of his humiliation. And then he was gone. The diner fell silent. Vivian sat frozen in the booth, her whole body shaking, unable to process what had just happened. Roman slid into the seat across from her, his expression softening. It's done, he said quietly. He can't hurt you anymore. Vivian's breath came out in a sob she couldn't hold back. I thought... She couldn't finish the sentence. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to press them flat against the table to keep them still. I know, Roman said, but you're safe now, I promise. Vivian looked at him through tears she hadn't known she was crying, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. The divorce papers were signed 3 days later in a lawyer's office that smelled like old books and expensive wood polish. Vivian sat across from an attorney Roman had hired, a sharp, efficient woman named Karen, who walked her through every line, every clause, every piece of legal language that would sever her ties to Grant Holloway forever. He's not contesting it, Karen said, sliding the final document across the desk. Given the criminal charges, his lawyers advised him to sign and move on. He doesn't have leverage anymore. Vivian picked up the pen, her hand trembling. She'd dreamed of this moment for years, imagined it 1,000 different ways. But now that it was here, it felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life instead of living her own. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, Vivian Hale. Not Holloway, not anymore, just Hale. Karen witnessed the signature, stamped the document, and smiled. You're officially divorced, she said. Congratulations. Vivian sat back in the chair, her whole body going limp with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Roman was waiting for her outside the building, leaning against his car, hands in his pockets. When Vivian walked out, he straightened, his eyes searching her face. How do you feel? He asked. Vivian thought about it for a moment, trying to find the right word. Free, she said finally. I feel free. Roman smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes, warm and real and unguarded. Good, he said, because you are. Over the next few weeks, Vivian threw herself into work at the clinic with a focus that bordered on obsessive. She arrived early, stayed late, took every shift Marcus would give her. She treated patients, organized supplies, updated records, and did everything she could to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Because when she stopped moving, she started thinking. And thinking led to questions she didn't know how to answer. What came next? Who was she now that she wasn't running anymore? What did a life look like when it wasn't built around survival? One evening, after the last patient had left and the clinic was quiet, Marcus found her sitting in the break room staring at the wall. You okay?
he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I don't know, Vivian admitted. I spent so long trying to get away from Grant that I never thought about what I'd do if I actually succeeded. Marcus sat down across from her, cradling his mug in both hands. You know what I think? He said. I think you've been surviving for so long that you forgot how to live, and now you've got the chance to figure that out. What if I don't know how? Then you learn, same way you learned how to survive in the first place. Vivian looked at him, her chest tight. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, Marcus said, but it's possible. And that's more than you had a few months ago. Betty. Roman came by the clinic that night, later than usual, carrying takeout bags that smelled like Chinese food. Thought you might be hungry, he said, setting the bags on the table in the break room. Vivian raised an eyebrow. You're feeding me again. It's what I do. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that had become comfortable over the weeks they'd spent in each other's orbit. Vivian had stopped questioning his presence, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was just there, steady, constant. Can I ask you something? Vivian said after a while. Sure. Why me? Out of everyone you could have helped, why did you pick me? Roman set down his chopsticks, his expression thoughtful. I told you before, he said. I saw you in that alley, and you looked like you were still fighting. That mattered to me. But why? Roman was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Because I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and no one can see you, he said finally. I grew up in a neighborhood where people disappeared all the time. Got swallowed up by poverty, violence, addiction. No one noticed. No one cared. I watched my sister die because we couldn't afford a doctor, and I swore I'd never be powerless like that again. He paused, his jaw tightening. So I built an empire. I made myself untouchable. And somewhere along the way, I became the kind of man people are afraid of, the kind of man who hurts people to get what he wants. He looked at Vivian, his eyes dark and honest. But when I saw you, I saw someone who was still trying to hold on to something good, even when you had nothing, and I thought maybe if I could help you, I could prove to myself that I wasn't completely lost. Vivian's breath caught. You're not lost, Roman. I've done things you don't know about, he said quietly. Things I can't take back. So have I, Vivian said. I stayed with a man who hurt me for 5 years because I was too afraid to leave. I let him convince me I was worthless. I believed him. That's on me. That's not the same. It is, Vivian interrupted. We've both made choices we regret. We've both hurt people, even if it was just ourselves. But we're still here, still trying. That has to count for something. Roman stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're braver than you think you are, he said. So are you. The space between them felt charged, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Roman stood abruptly, clearing his throat. I should go. It's late. Vivian stood too, her heart pounding. Roman, wait. He turned back, his eyes searching her face. Thank you, she said. For everything. For saving me. For giving me a chance. For... She stopped, her voice breaking. For seeing me when no one else did. Roman crossed the space between them in 2 steps and pulled her into a hug. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the things they'd been holding back. Vivian buried her face in his chest and let herself hold on. You saved yourself, Roman said quietly, his voice rough. I just gave you a place to land. 2 nights later, Grant's trial made the front page of every newspaper in Chicago. Vivian sat in the apartment, staring at the headline, her hands shaking. Con man arrested. Real estate mogul faces federal fraud charges and allegations of abuse. There was a photo of Grant being led into court in handcuffs, his face twisted in anger. Below it, a smaller photo of Vivian from years ago, back when she still smiled in pictures. The article detailed everything. The fake investment schemes, the stolen money, the shell companies. And buried in the middle, a paragraph about his ex-wife, a nurse who had fled years of abuse and was now rebuilding her life in Chicago. Vivian set the paper down, her chest tight. She'd wanted justice, wanted him to pay for what he'd done to her, to all the people he'd hurt. But seeing it in print, seeing her life reduced to a paragraph in someone else's story, made her feel exposed and small. Her phone buzzed, a text from Roman. "You okay?" She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I don't know." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Want company?" Vivian hesitated, then typed, "Yes." He was there in 20 minutes. Roman didn't say anything when she opened the door. He just walked in, took one look at the newspaper on the table, and pulled her into his arms. Vivian broke. She sobbed into his chest, her whole body shaking, years of pain and fear and rage pouring out all at once. Roman held her through it, his hand steady on the back of her head, his voice low and soothing in her ear. "You're okay," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." When the tears finally stopped, Vivian pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall apart on you." "Don't apologize," Roman said. "You're allowed to feel this." Vivian sank onto the couch, exhausted. Roman sat beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to breathe. "I thought I'd feel different," Vivian said quietly. "When it was finally over, I thought I'd feel lighter, but I just feel tired." "That's normal," Roman said. "You've been running for so long, your body doesn't know how to stop yet. Give it time." "How much time?" "As much as you need." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same exhaustion in his eyes that she felt in her bones. "Are you tired too?" she asked. Roman smiled sadly. "Every day." "Then why do you keep going?" Roman was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on something she couldn't see. "Because of people like you," he said finally. "Because every time I think about walking away from everything, I see someone who needs help, and I can't ignore that, even when I want to." Vivian reached over and took his hand. "You're a good man, Roman DeLuca," she said, "whether you believe it or not." Roman's fingers tightened around hers. "I'm trying to be," he said quietly. "For you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous and impossibly real. Vivian didn't pull her hand away. She sat there on the couch, her fingers tangled with Roman's, feeling the weight of everything they'd both been carrying for too long. "You don't have to try for me," she said quietly. "You should try for yourself." "Maybe I don't know how to do one without the other anymore," Roman admitted. They sat in silence for a while, the city humming beyond the windows, the world continuing to turn even though everything between them felt like it had stopped. Finally, Roman stood, releasing her hand with what looked like reluctance. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "Why?" "Because Grant's sentencing hearing is tomorrow, and you're going to be there." Vivian's stomach dropped. "I can't." "You can," Roman said firmly. "And you will, because this is the last time you'll ever have to see him. The last time he'll ever have power over you. And you're going to walk in there with your head up and watch him lose everything he thought he had. What if I'm not strong enough?" Roman crouched in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "You walked through hell and came out alive," he said. "You're stronger than you know, and I'll be right there with you the whole time." The courthouse was everything Vivian remembered from nightmares she used to have. Cold marble floors, harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper and desperation. Roman walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back, steady and grounding. Luca followed a few steps behind, his presence a silent wall between Vivian and the world. They found seats in the gallery, near the back, but with a clear view of the defendant's table. Grant sat there in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his face haggard and pale. He looked smaller than Vivian remembered, diminished somehow, like a shadow of the man who used to fill entire rooms with his rage. When he turned and saw her, his eyes went cold. Vivian held his gaze and didn't look away. The judge entered and everyone stood. The proceedings began with the efficient, impersonal rhythm of the legal system grinding forward. Charges were read. Evidence was presented. Witnesses testified to Grant's crimes. The fraud, the embezzlement, the lives he'd destroyed chasing money and power he never deserved. And then it was Vivian's turn. The prosecutor called her to the stand. Vivian's legs felt like water as she stood, but Roman's hand caught hers for just a second, squeezing once before letting go. "You've got this," he whispered. Vivian walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The prosecutor was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice that felt safe. "Ms. Hale, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Vivian took a breath. "I was married to him for 5 years. And during that time, did he ever harm you physically?" "Yes." "Can you describe what happened?" Vivian's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "He broke my ribs twice, once because I asked him where he'd been all night, and once because I burned dinner. He dislocated my shoulder when I tried to leave the first time. He locked me in a bedroom for 3 days without food because a neighbor asked if I was okay." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "He told me I was worthless, that no one would believe me if I left, that I deserved everything he did to me." "And did you believe him?" "For a long time, yes, I did." "What changed?" Vivian looked across the courtroom at Roman, who sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving her face. "I realized I had a choice," she said quietly. "I could keep believing the lies, or I could fight for something better. So I left. And I kept running until I found people who reminded me I was worth saving." The prosecutor nodded, her expression soft with understanding. "Thank you, Ms. Hale. No further questions." Grant's lawyer stood, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like ice. "Ms. Hale, isn't it true that you left your husband without any explanation? That you abandoned your marriage and disappeared for years?" "I left because I was afraid he would kill me," Vivian said, her voice steady. "But you have no proof of these alleged incidents, do you? No medical records, no police reports?" "I was too scared to go to a hospital or call the police. He made sure of that." "So we're just supposed to take your word for it?" Vivian looked at Grant, then back at the lawyer. "Yes," she said simply, "because I'm telling the truth, and I think everyone in this room knows it." The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but the judge cut him off. "Move on, counselor." The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. More testimony, more evidence, more people standing up to say that Grant Holloway was exactly what Vivian had always known him to be: a liar, a thief, and a man who hurt people because he could. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was firm and final. "Grant Holloway, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Additionally, a permanent restraining order will be issued preventing you from contacting Vivian Hale or any member of her family in perpetuity." The gavel came down. It was over. Vivian sat in the witness stand, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Grant was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and just before he disappeared through the door, he turned back one last time. Their eyes met. Vivian saw rage there, and hatred, and the desperate need to hurt her one last time. But she also saw something else: defeat. He was powerless now, broken, and he knew it. Vivian stood, walked out of the courtroom with her head high, and didn't look back. Roman was waiting for her in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. When Vivian walked out, he straightened, his eyes searching her face. "How do you feel?" he asked. Vivian thought about it for a moment, trying to find words that fit. "Like I can breathe again," she said finally. Roman smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made something inside her chest crack open. "Good," he said, "because you deserve to breathe." They walked out of the courthouse together, into the bright afternoon sun, and Vivian felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked tight for years, finally letting go. Adson. 3 months later, the clinic had doubled in size. Roman had quietly purchased the building next door, knocked down the wall between them, and expanded the operation. They now had 6 exam rooms, a proper waiting area, new equipment, and enough staff to see 100 patients a day. Vivian had been promoted to director of nursing, a title that still felt surreal every time she said it out loud. She stood in the middle of the newly renovated waiting room, watching Maria, the woman with bronchitis who'd become a regular, laughing with Tommy, the kid who'd come in with a knife wound and never left. Sarah sat in the corner with baby Grace, who was now 4 months old and thriving. These were her people, her family, the ones she'd chosen and the ones who'd chosen her back. Marcus walked up beside her, coffee in hand, surveying the space with satisfaction. "We did good," he said. "Yeah," Vivian agreed. "We did." "You know Roman's planning something, right?" Vivian turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Marcus grinned. "He's been acting weird all week, distracted, keeps checking his phone. Luca says he's nervous about something, but he won't say what." "Roman doesn't get nervous." "That's what I thought too, but trust me, something's up." Vivian found out what it was that evening when Roman asked her to meet him on the roof. The same roof where they'd stood months ago, when Vivian had been freshly pulled from the streets and still couldn't believe any of it was real. Now she walked out onto the rooftop with steady legs and clear eyes. The city spread out before her like a promise she was finally ready to believe. Roman stood near the edge, his back to her, his hands in his pockets. "You wanted to see me?" Vivian asked. Roman turned, and the look on his face stopped her cold. He looked vulnerable, open, terrified in a way she'd never seen before. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." Roman took a breath, ran a hand through his hair, and started pacing. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, "about my life, about the choices I've made, about who I am and who I want to be." He stopped, looked at her, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. "Which is?" "That I don't want to do this alone anymore." Vivian's breath caught. Roman crossed the space between them, his eyes never leaving hers. "You changed everything for me, Vivian. You made me believe I could be better than what I was, that I could build something real instead of just taking what I wanted." His voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I'm still not a good man. I've still got blood on my hands and choices I can't undo. But when I'm with you, I want to be better. And that's something I've never felt before." Vivian's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. "Roman, let me finish, he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know this is complicated. I know I come with baggage and danger and a past that's not going away. But I also know that I love you, and I think I've loved you since the night I saw you in that alley, still fighting even when you had nothing left to fight with." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. Roman opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the light from the setting sun. "Marry me," he said, "not because you need me, not because I saved you, but because we save each other, every day, in ways that matter." Vivian couldn't breathe. She'd been married before. She knew what it felt like to say yes out of fear, desperation, survival. But this was different. This was Roman asking her to choose him the same way she'd chosen herself, with eyes wide open, knowing the risks, willing to fight for something better. "Yes," she whispered. Roman blinked. "Yes?" "Yes," Vivian said louder, laughing through tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Roman's face broke into a smile so wide it looked like it hurt, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her once before setting her down gently. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and Vivian stared at it, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I love you," she said, the words feeling new and terrifying and absolutely right. "I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," Roman said, his forehead pressed against hers. "More than I knew I could love anything." They stood there on the rooftop as the sun set over Chicago, two broken people who'd found a way to build something whole together. The wedding was small. They got married on a Saturday afternoon in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and possibility, with Marcus and Luca as witnesses and a judge who looked genuinely happy to be officiating. Vivian wore a simple white dress she'd picked out herself. Roman wore a dark suit that made him look less like a crime boss and more like a man who was trying his best to deserve the woman standing beside him. When the judge asked if she took Roman to be her husband, Vivian didn't hesitate. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. And when Roman slid the second ring onto her finger, a wedding band that matched the engagement ring, Vivian felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was standing in the light, choosing love, choosing hope, choosing a future she'd built with her own two hands. The judge pronounced them married, and Roman kissed her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Outside the courthouse, Marcus hugged them both, his eyes suspiciously wet. "Congratulations," he said. "You two deserve this." Luca clapped Roman on the shoulder, grinning. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I," Roman admitted, his arm around Vivian's waist. "But here we are." 6 months later, Vivian stood in the clinic, now officially renamed the Mercy Street Health Center, watching the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new pediatric wing. Roman stood beside her, his hand in hers, looking proud and uncomfortable with all the attention. The mayor was there, giving a speech about community investment and public health. Journalists snapped photos. Patients and staff crowded around, clapping and cheering, but Vivian barely heard any of it. She was too busy watching the faces of the people who filled the space. Mothers holding sick children, elderly men who'd finally found a place that treated them with dignity, teenagers who'd been patched up and sent back into the world with a little more hope than they'd had before. This was real. This mattered, and she'd helped build it. After the ceremony, Roman pulled her aside, away from the crowd. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," Vivian said. "I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy." But Roman smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look younger than his years. "Me too," he said. They stood there together, watching the people move through the clinic, and Vivian realized something that made her chest ache in the best way. She'd spent years thinking happiness was something that happened to other people, something she didn't deserve, something she'd lost the right to a long time ago. But she'd been wrong. Happiness wasn't a reward you earned by being perfect. It wasn't something that appeared when you finally fixed all your mistakes. It was a choice, a daily, deliberate choice to keep moving forward, to keep trying, to keep believing that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And for the first time in her life, Vivian was choosing it. Tita. That night, Roman and Vivian sat on their apartment balcony, the same apartment where she'd spent her first night off the streets, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Vivian asked, "if you hadn't looked out that window that night?" Roman was quiet for a moment, his hand absently playing with her fingers. "All the time," he admitted. "But then I think about how many nights I stood at that window and saw people who needed help, and I walked away. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I had enough to deal with." "What made me different?" Roman turned to look at her, his eyes soft in the dim light. "You looked up," he said simply. "Everyone else looked down, looked away. But you looked up, like you were still searching for something worth fighting for. And that mattered to me. It made me want to be someone worth finding." Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "You know what I think?" she said. "I think we both needed saving. We just didn't know it yet." "Yeah, Roman agreed. "I think you're right." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from knowing someone deeply enough to not need words. After a while, Vivian spoke again. "I've been thinking about expanding the clinic," she said. "Opening satellite locations in other neighborhoods, places where people are falling through the cracks the same way I did." Roman smiled. "How many locations?" 5 to start. Maybe more if it works." "It'll work," Roman said with certainty, "and I'll fund every single one of them." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Roman interrupted gently. "I want to. This is what I want to build now. Not empires, not power, just places where people can get help when they need it most." Vivian turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You really have changed," she said. "So have you." "We changed each other." "Yeah," Roman said, pulling her closer. "We did." A year later, on the anniversary of the night Vivian had been pulled from the alley, she stood in that same spot, looking up at the building where Roman's office sat. The alley was cleaner now, Roman had quietly arranged for regular maintenance, better lighting, security patrols. It wasn't perfect, nothing in this city was, but it was safer, better. Marcus stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking at the space with the same wonder she felt. "Hard to believe this is where it all started," he said. "I know," Vivian said. "I was dying here. And now you're living," Marcus finished. "Really living." Vivian nodded, her throat tight. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, broken, terrified, convinced she'd lost everything that mattered. That woman wouldn't recognize who Vivian had become, the director of a thriving health center, a wife, a person who mattered, but she also knew that woman was still part of her, would always be part of her. Because survival wasn't something you left behind. It was something you carried forward, a reminder of how far you'd come and how much strength it took to get there. "You ready?" Marcus asked. Vivian looked up at the building one last time, then turned away. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." They walked back to the clinic together, where Roman was waiting with the rest of the staff for the anniversary celebration they'd planned. When Vivian walked in, everyone cheered. Roman crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead. "Happy anniversary," he murmured. "Of what? Our wedding?" "Of the night I found you," Roman said. "The night everything changed." Vivian smiled, her eyes wet. "Best night of my life." "Mine too." They stood together in the middle of the clinic, surrounded by people they'd helped and people who'd helped them, and Vivian realized something profound. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey you took one step at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. And she was finally on the right path. Not because someone had saved her, but because she'd learned to save herself. And then she'd learned to help others do the same. 3 years later, Vivian sat in the newly opened 6th location of the Mercy Street Health Center, reading through patient files and sipping terrible coffee that reminded her of the early days. The centers were thriving. Over 5,000 patients served in the last year alone. Real impact, real change. Roman had stepped back from most of his old business, transitioning everything he could into legitimate enterprises. It wasn't perfect. Some things couldn't be undone, but he was trying. Every single day he was trying. Vivian's phone buzzed, a text from Roman. "Dinner tonight? I have something to tell you." She smiled and typed back, "Good news or bad news?" "Good. Very good." Vivian set down her phone, her curiosity piqued. That night, over pasta at the same Italian restaurant where Marco, the kid who'd left her food all those years ago, now worked as a manager, Roman took her hand across the table. "I met with my lawyers today," he said. "Signed the last of the papers. Everything's official." "What's official?" "The foundation," Roman said. "The DeLuca Foundation for Community Health. Fully funded. Fully operational. Dedicated to opening free clinics in underserved communities across the country." Vivian's breath caught. "Roman, it's your foundation," he continued. "You'll run it, make all the decisions, build it however you want. I'm just the money guy." Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks before she could stop them. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you showed me what's worth fighting for," Roman said simply. "And I want to spend the rest of my life helping you fight for it." Vivian stood, walked around the table, and kissed him hard enough to make the other diners stare. "I love you," she said against his lips. "So much." "I love you too," Roman said. "Always." 5 years later, Vivian stood on a stage in front of 200 people at a healthcare conference, giving a keynote speech about sustainable community health models. She wore a navy suit that fit perfectly, her hair styled professionally, her presence commanding. She wasn't the woman who'd hidden in alleys anymore. She was the woman who'd built something from nothing. Roman sat in the front row, watching her with pride written all over his face. When Vivian finished her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. She stood there, taking it in, feeling the weight of how far she'd come. From invisible to undeniable. From voiceless to heard. From broken to whole. After the conference, Roman met her backstage. "You were incredible," he said. "I was terrified," Vivian admitted. "Couldn't tell."
They walked out of the convention center hand in hand into the Chicago evening that felt warm and full of possibility. "You know what I realized today?" Vivian said. "What?" "I spent so many years thinking I needed someone to save me, that I was too weak, too broken, too lost to save myself." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "But that was never true. I saved myself. I just needed someone to remind me I was worth saving." Roman cupped her face in his hands, his eyes soft. "And you reminded me I was worth becoming something better," he said. "So I guess we're even." "I guess we are." They stood there on the sidewalk, two people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something bright together, and Vivian felt a peace she'd never known before. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not painless, not a straight line from broken to whole, but real. Messy and hard-won, and absolutely worth every step. Because the truth about survival was simple. You didn't survive by forgetting where you'd been. You survived by remembering and then choosing every single day to keep moving forward anyway. And that was exactly what Vivian intended to do for the rest of her life.